What this teacher did to Reba 50 years ago left the country star in tears. The ending of this story will break your heart. The worn leather suitcase sat beside Eleanor Thompson's hospital bed, packed with nothing but hope and 50 years of memories. At 92, her arthritic hands shook as she folded the yellowed newspaper clipping for the 100th time that week. Reba McEntire announces final farewell tour, read the headline that had changed everything. The doctors said she had maybe 6 months left, but Eleanor knew she needed only one perfect night. "Mrs. Thompson, you really shouldn't be traveling alone," Dr. Martinez had warned her 3 days earlier, his voice heavy with concern. "Your heart condition is serious and Nashville is 8 hours away by bus." But Eleanor had lived 87 years before meeting her first cardiologist, and she wasn't about to let Dr. Martinez stop her now. Some journeys, she believed, were worth the risk. Some debts could only be repaid in person. The Greyhound bus station in Chockie, Oklahoma, hadn't seen this much excitement since the oil boom of 1973. Word had spread through the small farming community that their retired schoolteacher was making what everyone suspected might be her final adventure. Martha Williams from the diner had packed her a lunch. Bill Henderson from the hardware store had insisted on driving her to the station. Even gruff old Pastor Roberts had said a prayer for safe travels, though he still couldn't understand why anyone would waste money on that loud country music nonsense. Eleanor clutched her bus ticket like a lifeline as the vehicle pulled away from everything she had ever known. Through the dusty window, she watched the wheat fields blur into endless ribbons of gold, each mile taking her closer to a reunion 60 years in the making. If someone had asked Eleanor to explain why this moment mattered so much, she would have struggled to find the right words. How do you explain that a single moment in 1964 had defined not just one career, but 2 entire lives? How do you tell people that sometimes teachers learn more from their students than they ever teach? Now, if you're enjoying this story of second chances and the power of believing in someone, we'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what teacher made the biggest difference in your life. Your stories inspire us to keep sharing these heartwarming tales that remind us what really matters. The truth was, Eleanor had been following Reba's career since that first radio play in 1976. She had bought every album, watched every television appearance, and secretly cried tears of pride during Reba's induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, but she had never reached out, never tried to make contact. What would she say? "Hello? I'm the teacher who gave you a guitar when you were 9. It seemed presumptuous somehow. The student had far surpassed anything the teacher had ever imagined possible, but time has a way of changing perspectives. When Eleanor received her diagnosis, something shifted. The polite distance she had maintained for decades suddenly felt like cowardice. She realized she had spent so many years being proud of Reba from afar that she had forgotten to be proud of her own small part in launching that extraordinary career. The bus made several stops through Arkansas and Tennessee, picking up travelers with their own destinations and dreams. Eleanor found herself seated next to a young woman heading to Nashville to audition for singing competitions. Her name was Katie, and she couldn't have been more than 25, with nervous energy that reminded Eleanor of countless students over the years. "Are you visiting family in Nashville?" Katie asked, noticing Eleanor's age and wondering what would bring such an elderly woman to Music City. Eleanor smiled, her weathered hands smoothing the fabric of her best Sunday dress. "You could say that. I'm going to see someone I helped raise, in a way." "That's sweet. Is she expecting you?" "No," Eleanor admitted, feeling suddenly foolish. "She doesn't even know I'm coming. I'm not sure she'd even remember me if she did." Katie's expression grew concerned. "Mom, Nashville's a big city. If your family doesn't know you're coming—" "Oh, she's not family," Eleanor interrupted gently. "She's someone I used to teach, a long time ago." The young woman's confusion was evident, but something in Eleanor's tone discouraged further questions. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, Katie occasionally humming softly to herself, Eleanor lost in memories that felt both distant and immediate. The Nashville skyline appeared just as the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of gold that reminded Eleanor of October afternoons in her classroom. Her heart rate quickened, though she couldn't tell if it was excitement or her medical condition. Either way, there was no turning back now. The Grand Ole Opry House stood like a temple to country music, its iconic red brick facade glowing under the early evening lights. Eleanor had seen it countless times in photographs and on television, but standing before it in person felt surreal. Thousands of fans were already gathering, their excitement palpable in the crisp autumn air. Eleanor's ticket was for the very last row of the upper balcony, the cheapest seat she could afford on her teacher's pension. She had spent 3 months saving for this moment, giving up her weekly grocery store treats and skipping her usual Christmas gifts to neighbors. But as she looked up at the towering venue, she realized something that made her stomach drop. How could she possibly get a message to Reba from way up there? How could she make herself seen among 20,000 screaming fans? The folded letter in her purse suddenly felt inadequate, a foolish gesture from a foolish old woman who had traveled 8 hours for nothing. A group of younger fans brushed past her, their rhinestone-studded shirts catching the light. They were discussing Reba's career with the kind of detailed knowledge that comes from internet research and social media follows. Eleanor listened to them recite chart positions and album sales, awards and achievements that sounded almost mythical when listed all together. "I've been following her since before most of you were born," Eleanor wanted to say, but she held her tongue. These young people would never understand that she had been Reba's first audience, the first person to believe in a voice that would eventually fill stadiums. As the crowd began filtering into the venue, Eleanor noticed the VIP entrance where sleek black cars were dropping off special guests and industry professionals. Security guards with earpieces checked credentials with military precision. The distance between Eleanor's world and Reba's had never felt greater, but then she remembered something that gave her courage. In her purse, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a piece of paper that might just bridge that distance. It was Reba's original assignment from 4th grade, the one where she had written about her dream of singing at the Grand Ole Opry. Eleanor had kept it all these years, along with a class photo from 1964. If she could just get someone to look at these artifacts, maybe they would understand that this wasn't just another fan story. Maybe they would see that some connections transcend time and fame, that some debts can only be repaid in person. Eleanor took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders with the same determination that had carried her through 45 years of teaching, and walked toward the entrance. She had come 800 miles for this moment. She wasn't going to let security guards or protocols or her own fear stop her now. The first obstacle appeared immediately. A young security guard, probably not much older than Katie from the bus, blocked her path to the VIP entrance with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, general admission is through the main entrance," he said, pointing toward the massive crowd lines. "Do you need help finding your way?" Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "Actually, I was hoping someone could deliver a message to Miss McIntyre. I'm a former teacher of hers and I've traveled quite far." The guard's smile became more forced. "I'm sure you understand, ma'am, but we get requests like that all the time. Miss McIntyre can't meet with everyone who claims to know her. If you'd like to send fan mail, there's an address on her website." "Fan mail?" Eleanor's voice carried a hint of the authority that had once commanded respect from rebellious teenagers. "Young man, I taught that girl when she was 9 years old. I have her school assignments and photographs to prove it." But the guard had already turned his attention to a limousine pulling up to the curb, dismissing Eleanor with the casual cruelty of someone who had heard 100 similar claims. She stood there for a moment, feeling smaller and more invisible than she had in years. The main entrance crowd was overwhelming. Thousands of people pushed and moved in waves that threatened to knock Eleanor off balance. Her age made her a liability in the surge of excited fans, and more than once she had to steady herself against walls and railings. By the time she reached her seat in the upper balcony, Eleanor was exhausted and discouraged. The stage looked impossibly small from her vantage point, and she wondered if she would even be able to see Reba clearly, much less make any kind of meaningful connection. But as the lights dimmed and the first chords of music filled the massive space, something magical happened. Reba's voice, that same voice Eleanor had first heard trembling with nerves in a 4th grade classroom, soared through the venue with power and confidence that took her breath away. Eleanor closed her eyes and was transported back to that October day in 1964, when a scared little girl with red hair and freckles had sung "You Are My Sunshine" with such pure emotion that it had moved everyone in room 12 to tears. That little girl had kept her promise. She'd made it to the Grand Ole Opry just like she had written in her assignment all those years ago. As the first song ended and the crowd erupted in applause, Eleanor realized that maybe getting close to Reba physically wasn't the point of this journey. Maybe it was enough to witness what that scared little girl had become to see the confidence and joy radiating from the stage, to know that somewhere in Reba's heart, a teacher's encouragement still lived. But just as Eleanor was beginning to make peace with watching from a distance, something unexpected happened that would change both of their lives forever. During the intermission, as house lights came up and fans began moving toward concession stands, Eleanor noticed a commotion near the VIP section below. A young woman in an official staff shirt was arguing with someone on her radio, gesturing frantically toward the stage. Eleanor couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language suggested urgency, maybe even panic. What Eleanor didn't know was that Reba's longtime backup guitarist had just collapsed backstage with chest pains. The paramedics were loading him into an ambulance, and the show's second half was in jeopardy. Reba's tour manager was scrambling to find a replacement, calling every musician in Nashville who might be available on such short notice. As Eleanor watched the drama unfold below, she noticed something that made her heart skip. A maintenance worker was collecting items that had been thrown onto the stage during the first half of the show. Among the flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten signs, Eleanor could see him picking up folded pieces of paper, fan letters, messages that would never reach their intended recipient. The sight triggered a memory so vivid it took Eleanor's breath away. She was back in her classroom in 1965, the year after Reba had moved on to 5th grade. A new student named Tommy Martinez had arrived mid-semester, a quiet boy whose family had moved from Mexico seeking work in the oil fields. Like Reba had been, Tommy was painfully shy, but his shyness was compounded by a language barrier that made other children ignore or mock him. Eleanor had tried everything to draw Tommy out, but nothing worked until she remembered what had succeeded with Reba. She brought her guitar to school and asked Tommy to sing something from his homeland. In halting Spanish, he had performed a lullaby his grandmother used to sing. The other children, who had been cruel just moments before, sat in stunned silence at the beauty of his voice. That moment had taught Eleanor something profound about the power of giving people the right stage for their gifts. She had used that lesson hundreds of times over the next 4 decades, always thinking of it as the Reba principle. Give someone the right opportunity, and they might just surprise everyone, including themselves. Now, watching the chaos below, Eleanor realized that fate might be offering her own stage. But first, she had to find the courage to step onto it. The intermission was nearly over when Eleanor made her decision. She couldn't get to Reba through normal channels, but maybe she could get to the people who worked for Reba. The staff member who had been arguing on the radio was still visible near the VIP section, now speaking intensely with what appeared to be a security supervisor. Eleanor began the long journey down from the upper balcony, her arthritic knees protesting every step. The crowds were returning to their seats, creating a river of movement that threatened to sweep her along. But Eleanor had spent 45 years managing crowded hallways during class changes. She knew how to navigate human traffic. As she reached the main floor, Eleanor could see the staff member more clearly. She was probably in her 30s, with the harried look of someone dealing with a crisis. Her name tag read, Sarah, Tour Coordinator. This was Eleanor's chance, but she would have to time it perfectly. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, approaching Sarah during a brief lull in her radio conversations. "I couldn't help but notice there seems to be some kind of problem." Sarah looked up, clearly frustrated at being interrupted by what appeared to be a lost elderly fan. "Ma'am, if you need help finding your seat, there are ushers who can assist you." "Actually, I think I might be able to help you," Eleanor said with the calm confidence that had once diffused countless playground disputes. "I've been teaching for 45 years, and I've learned to read situations. You're dealing with a musician emergency, aren't you?" Sarah's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" Eleanor smiled. "When you've spent as much time as I have watching young people perform, you learn to recognize the signs of backstage panic. Your guitarist is injured or ill, and you're trying to find a replacement on short notice." The radio crackled to life before Sarah could respond. "Sarah, any luck with the backup musicians? We've got 15 minutes before places and Reba's getting worried." Sarah keyed her radio with a sigh. "Still working on it. 3 no's so far, and the 2 maybes won't commit without hearing the set list first." Eleanor saw her opening. "Sarah, I know this might sound strange, but I think I can help. Not with music, but with something that might matter even more right now. I have something that belongs to Miss McIntyre, something she lost 60 years ago." The younger woman's expression was skeptical, but something in Eleanor's tone made her pause. What kind of something? Eleanor carefully pulled the tissue-wrapped bundle from her purse. Inside was the faded school assignment, written in a child's careful handwriting, along with the class photograph from 1964. I'm Eleanor Thompson. I was Reba's fourth-grade teacher in Chockey, Oklahoma. I've kept these all these years because I never found the right moment to return them. But tonight feels like that moment. Sarah stared at the papers, her radio momentarily forgotten. The assignment was clearly authentic, complete with Eleanor's red ink corrections and a gold star at the top. The photograph showed a young Reba standing in the back row of a typical small-town classroom, her red hair catching the light from tall windows. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered. She talks about her elementary school days sometimes, especially when she's nervous or homesick. She always mentions a teacher who believed in her when nobody else did. Eleanor's heart raced. She remembers. Are you kidding? She credits you with starting her whole career. She says you were the first person who ever told her she had talent worth sharing. Sarah looked up from the papers with new respect. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you might be exactly what Reba needs right now." The radio crackled again, more urgently this time. "Sarah, we've got 10 minutes. The crowd's getting restless, and Reba's asking about the guitarist situation." Sarah made a decision that would change the trajectory of the evening. "Tell Reba I'm bringing someone to see her, someone who might help her remember why she started singing in the first place." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with her heart condition. After 60 years, she was finally going to see her student again. But as Sarah led her toward the backstage area, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was unprepared for this moment. What do you say to someone who has achieved everything you once hoped they might? How do you bridge 6 decades of distance and success? How do you tell someone that watching their dreams come true has been one of the greatest privileges of your life? The backstage area was controlled chaos. Sound technicians ran cables, wardrobe assistants carried sequined outfits, and security personnel spoke into headsets with military precision. Eleanor felt completely out of place in her simple Sunday dress, but Sarah guided her through the maze with protective determination. "Reba's in her private dressing room," Sarah explained as they walked. "She's probably doing her pre-show meditation right now. She gets quiet before big performances, especially when something's gone wrong." They stopped in front of a door marked with a gold star and Reba McEntire in elegant script. Sarah knocked softly. "Reba, I've got someone here who might lift your spirits." "Not now, Sarah," came the muffled reply. "I'm trying to figure out how we're going to pull off the second half without Marcus. Maybe we should just do an acoustic set." Sarah looked at Eleanor and smiled. "Trust me on this one, Reba. I think you'll want to meet this lady." There was a pause, then footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, Eleanor found herself face to face with the most famous woman in country music, and for a moment, both women were speechless. Reba looked exactly like she did on television, but smaller somehow, more human. Her famous red hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the stress of the evening, but it was her eyes that took Eleanor's breath away. They were the same eyes that had looked up at her with desperate hope 60 years ago in a small-town classroom. "Oh my God," Reba whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "Eleanor Thompson, I can't believe it's really you." The recognition in Reba's voice confirmed what Eleanor had hardly dared to hope. She hadn't been forgotten. Despite all the years and all the fame, she had remained important enough to remember. "Hello, Reba," Eleanor said softly. "I hope you don't mind me showing up unannounced. I just wanted to return something that belongs to you." Reba's eyes moved to the papers in Eleanor's hands, and even from a distance she seemed to recognize them. "Is that my old school assignment? The one about wanting to sing at the Opry?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly emotional. "I've kept it all these years, along with our class picture. I thought you might like to have them back." Reba stepped forward and gently took the papers, her hands trembling slightly. As she read her own childhood words, tears began to form in her eyes. "I can't believe you saved this. I can't believe you're here." The two women stood there for a moment, decades collapsing into nothing, teacher and student reunited by the power of dreams preserved and promises kept. But their reunion was about to be interrupted by a revelation that would shake both of their worlds to the core. "Mrs. Thompson," Reba said, her voice thick with emotion, "you have no idea how many times I've thought about you over the years. How many times I've wanted to find you and say thank you." Eleanor felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to thank me. Watching you succeed has been thanks enough." But I do need to thank you, Reba insisted, still clutching the old assignment. You saved my life that day in your classroom. I was ready to give up on everything. The other kids had been so cruel, and I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a weird girl with frizzy red hair who didn't belong anywhere. The memory came flooding back to Eleanor with vivid clarity. It hadn't just been one day, but a series of incidents that had nearly broken young Reba's spirit. There had been the morning when someone had put gum in her hair during recess, the afternoon when the popular girls had mimicked her Oklahoma accent until she stopped speaking altogether, the day when she had been excluded from the Christmas pageant because, as one parent had put it, she doesn't have the right look for an angel. You were never weird, Eleanor said firmly. You were special. There's a difference, though it took me too many years of teaching to understand it myself. Reba wiped her eyes, careful not to smudge her stage makeup. Do you remember what you told me after I sang that day? After everyone else had left the classroom? Eleanor paused, searching her memory. There had been so many conversations with so many students over the years, but as she looked into Reba's eyes, the words came back to her with startling clarity. I told you that your voice was like a key, Eleanor said slowly. A key that could unlock doors you didn't even know existed yet. And you told me that someday, when I was famous and standing on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, I should remember that it all started in room 12, with a scared little girl and a borrowed guitar. Reba's voice broke slightly. Mrs. Thompson, I've stood on that Opry stage 47 times and I've thought of you every single time. Eleanor felt her knees go weak. In all her dreams of this reunion, she had never imagined that she had remained such a constant presence in Reba's thoughts. The weight of that responsibility, of knowing that her words had carried such power, was almost overwhelming. Sarah, who had been quietly observing the reunion, suddenly spoke up. I hate to interrupt, but we've got 5 minutes until places. The crowd's getting restless and we still haven't solved the guitarist problem. Reba looked torn between her professional obligations and her desire to continue talking with Eleanor. Can you stay after the show, please? There's so much I want to tell you, so much I want to ask you. Of course I'll stay, Eleanor said. I didn't come all this way just to say hello and goodbye again. As Reba prepared to return to the stage, Eleanor noticed something that the superstar probably hadn't realized herself. Reba's hands were shaking, not just with emotion from their reunion, but with genuine stage nerves. The technical difficulties had thrown off her usual pre-show routine, and meeting Eleanor had stirred up emotions that were probably interfering with her professional composure. Reba, Eleanor said gently, using the same tone she had once used to calm nervous students before school presentations. Are you all right to perform? Reba tried to smile confidently, but Eleanor's teacher instincts were still sharp after all these years. I'm fine, it's just, seeing you here, it's brought back so many memories. Good memories, but strong ones, and with Marcus being sick, I'm worried about how the second half will go. Eleanor made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. What if I watched from the wings? Would that help? Sarah looked uncertain about the protocol implications, but Reba's face lit up with the same expression she had worn as a 9-year-old being offered encouragement. You would do that? You wouldn't mind being backstage during the show? Sweetheart, I've been your audience for 60 years. I'd be honored to watch from up close for once. As they made their way toward the stage, Eleanor found herself thinking about all the school concerts and talent shows she had attended over the decades. She had always preferred to watch from the back of the auditorium, where she could see both the performers and the audience, where she could gauge reactions and offer support without being intrusive. But tonight was different. Tonight, her presence was specifically requested, specifically needed. The wings of the Grand Ole Opry stage were cramped with equipment and personnel, but Sarah found Eleanor a spot where she would be safe and have a clear view of both Reba and the audience. The crowd noise was deafening. 20,000 people cheering and calling Reba's name with an enthusiasm that reminded Eleanor of football games and pep rallies. As the lights dimmed and Reba took the stage for the second half of her show, Eleanor felt a pride so deep it was almost painful. The scared little girl from room 12 was commanding the attention of thousands, her voice filling the massive venue with power and confidence that seemed to flow directly from her soul. But something was different about this performance. Maybe it was the missing guitarist, or maybe it was the emotional impact of their reunion, but Reba seemed more vulnerable tonight, more connected to the raw feelings that had first driven her to sing. When she performed The Greatest Man I Never Knew, her voice carried a weight that made even the sound technicians pause in their work. During a quiet moment between songs, Reba did something that surprised everyone. She walked to the front of the stage and spoke directly to the audience in a way that felt more like a conversation than a performance. "Y'all, I've got to tell you about something special that happened tonight," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena. "Sometimes life brings you full circle in ways you never expect. Tonight, sitting in our audience, is the woman who started it all for me. My fourth-grade teacher from Chalky, Oklahoma, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. A spotlight found Eleanor in the wings, and 20,000 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The applause was thunderous, but Eleanor felt frozen, completely unprepared for this level of public attention. She had spent her entire career being quietly supportive, never seeking the spotlight for herself. "Mrs. Thompson," Reba continued, "I don't know if you realize this, but you changed my life with one simple act of kindness. When I was too scared to speak in front of our class, you handed me a guitar and told me that sometimes we can say more with music than we can with words." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face as the crowd continued to applaud. But Reba wasn't finished. "What Mrs. Thompson didn't know," Reba said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is that I kept every encouraging note she ever wrote on my papers. Every gold star, every well done, every you have something special comment became a building block in my confidence. Teachers, y'all don't always know the power of your words." The applause grew even louder, and Eleanor could see audience members wiping their own eyes. But then Reba said something that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. "Mrs. Thompson, would you come out here and join me? I'd like everyone to meet the woman who taught me that dreams are worth fighting for." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. The idea of walking onto that stage in front of all those people was terrifying, but as she looked at Reba's encouraging face, she remembered her own advice from 60 years ago. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to step into the spotlight when someone believes you belong there. With shaking legs and Sarah's supportive hand on her elbow, Eleanor walked onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. The roar of the crowd was overwhelming, but Reba's warm hug steadied her as they stood together in the bright lights. "Thank you for saving me," Reba whispered in her ear, words that only Eleanor could hear. But Eleanor was about to learn that she hadn't been the only one doing the saving all those years ago. What Reba revealed next would force Eleanor to reconsider everything she thought she knew about that pivotal moment in Room 12, and about the true impact teachers and students have on each other's lives. "Y'all," Reba said to the audience, still holding Eleanor's hand, "there's something else I need to tell you about Mrs. Thompson, something I've never told anyone before, not even her." Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. Standing under the bright stage lights, surrounded by thousands of expectant faces, she had no idea what revelation was coming. But something in Reba's voice suggested it would be significant. "The day I sang in Mrs. Thompson's classroom wasn't just important, because it was the first time I performed in public," Reba continued, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed arena. "It was important because of what happened after school that day. Mrs. Thompson, do you remember walking me home?" Eleanor's mind raced back through the years. She had walked many students home over the decades, especially the ones who seemed to need extra support or encouragement. But that particular day with Reba was beginning to come back to her in fragments. "I remember," Eleanor said softly into the microphone Reba had positioned between them. "You were upset about something, more upset than usual." "I was upset," Reba confirmed, "because I had heard my parents talking the night before about money problems, bad money problems. My daddy's job at the ranch wasn't paying enough, and Mama was working double shifts at the diner, but it still wasn't enough. They were talking about having to move away from Chalky, maybe all the way to Tulsa, where Daddy might find better work." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Eleanor felt a chill of memory as more details began surfacing in her mind. "I was terrified," Reba continued, "because moving meant leaving the only teacher who had ever believed in me. It meant starting over at a new school where nobody knew me, where I'd probably go back to being the weird, quiet girl in the corner." Eleanor remembered now. She remembered Reba's tear-stained face as they walked the dusty road toward the McIntyre farm. She remembered the way the 9-year-old had clung to her hand like a lifeline. "What Mrs. Thompson did next," Reba said, turning to face Eleanor directly, "changed not just my life, but my entire family's future." Eleanor felt confused. She didn't remember doing anything particularly significant that day beyond offering comfort and encouragement, but Reba's next words hit her like a physical blow. "Mrs. Thompson drove out to our farm that evening and had a long talk with my parents. She told them about a music program at the community college in town, one that offered scholarships for talented young people. She helped my mama apply for a better job at the bank, writing a recommendation letter that talked about Mama's work ethic and reliability. Eleanor's eyes widened. She had done those things, but she had never thought of them as extraordinary. They were simply what teachers did when their students needed help. But that wasn't all, Reba continued, her voice growing emotional. Mrs. Thompson also arranged for our church to help with some of our bills that month. She never told us it was her, but years later, Pastor Williams let it slip that an anonymous donor had covered our rent and groceries for 6 weeks, while Daddy found steadier work. The audience was completely silent, many people wiping tears from their eyes. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she realized what Reba was revealing. "That anonymous donor was you, wasn't it, Mrs. Thompson?" Reba asked gently. Eleanor felt exposed and uncomfortable with the public attention on her private charitable acts. "Reba, that was what neighbors do for neighbors in small towns." "No, ma'am," Reba said firmly. "That was what someone with a huge heart does when they see a family in trouble. You used your own teacher's salary, money you probably needed for your own expenses, to keep my family from having to leave town." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. She had never wanted recognition for those actions. At the time, she had simply seen a talented child whose potential would be wasted if her family was forced to move away from supportive community resources. "The community college music program you told my parents about," Reba continued. "That's where I met my first real music teacher. That's where I learned to play guitar properly and started writing my own songs. None of that would have happened if we had moved to Tulsa." The implications of Reba's revelation were staggering. Eleanor had always focused on that one moment in the classroom, the day she had handed Reba a guitar and encouraged her to sing. But apparently, her influence had extended far beyond that single act of classroom kindness. "Mrs. Thompson," Reba said, "you didn't just encourage my musical dreams. You made it financially possible for my family to stay in a place where those dreams could grow. Every song I've ever recorded, every stage I've ever stood on, every person I've hopefully inspired through my music. It all traces back to your generosity that autumn." Eleanor was overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. In her mind, she had simply helped a struggling family through a difficult time. She had never calculated the far-reaching effects of keeping the McIntyres in Chocky. "But there's more," Reba said, and Eleanor wondered how there could possibly be more. "Mrs. Thompson, do you remember the Christmas concert that year? The one where I sang my first solo?" Eleanor nodded, remembering the little red-haired girl in a borrowed dress, singing Silent Night, with a voice that had hushed the entire school auditorium. "You bought me that dress," Reba revealed. "When my mama couldn't afford a new outfit for the concert, you took me shopping and told everyone it was an early Christmas present, but I heard you on the phone with the store, arranging a payment plan so you could afford it." More memories flooded back to Eleanor. The dress had been simple but pretty, red velvet with a white collar. She had seen how much it meant to Reba to have something new and special for her first solo performance. "That dress made me feel like I belonged on stage," Reba continued. "It gave me confidence I had never felt before, and when people complimented how nice I looked, it was the first time in my life I felt pretty, instead of weird." Eleanor was beginning to understand the true scope of her impact on Reba's life. It hadn't been just one moment of encouragement, but a series of supportive actions that had built a foundation for everything that followed. "The guitar you let me borrow from school that first day?" Reba asked. "You never asked for it back. When I finally worked up the courage to return it months later, you told me it was mine to keep. You said every musician needed their own instrument." "It was an old guitar that had been donated to the school," Eleanor protested weakly. "It wasn't being used by anyone else." "It was my first guitar," Reba said simply. "I still have it. It's in my office at home, in a place of honor. I've written some of my biggest hits on that guitar." The audience erupted in applause, but Eleanor barely heard it. She was reeling from the realization that her simple acts of kindness had been so carefully remembered and treasured by her former student. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reba announced to the crowd, "I want you to understand something. Mrs. Thompson isn't just the teacher who encouraged my musical dreams. She's the reason I was able to stay in a place where those dreams could come true. She's the reason I had the tools and confidence to pursue music seriously. Every success in my career can be traced back to her generosity and belief in a scared little girl." The standing ovation was deafening, but Eleanor felt dizzy and overwhelmed. This level of public praise was foreign to her, and the revelation of how deeply her actions had affected Reba's entire trajectory was almost too much to process. But Reba wasn't finished. As the applause died down, she made an announcement that would cement this night as one of the most memorable in Grand Ole Opry history. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been successful beyond anything that little girl in your classroom could have imagined. But success means nothing if you can't share it with the people who made it possible. I want to do something tonight that I should have done years ago." Reba gestured to someone in the wings, and Sarah appeared carrying an acoustic guitar. Not just any guitar, but one that Eleanor recognized immediately, despite the decades that had passed. "This is the guitar you gave me all those years ago," Reba said, taking the instrument from Sarah, "the one that started everything. I'd like to play it for you tonight here on the Opry stage, and I'd like you to sing with me." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. "Reba, I can't. I'm not a performer. I'm just a teacher." "You're not just anything," Reba said firmly. "And tonight, I want everyone to hear the voice that first encouraged mine. What do you say we sing 'You Are My Sunshine' together, just like we did in room 12 60 years ago?" Eleanor looked out at the sea of faces, all turned toward her with expectation and encouragement. For a moment, she was transported back to that classroom, feeling the same mix of terror and possibility that she had seen in young Reba's eyes all those years ago. But this time she understood something that had taken her decades to learn. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not just believing in their dreams, but being brave enough to share in them. "All right," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but determined, "but you'll have to help this old voice along." As Reba began strumming the familiar chords on the guitar that had started it all, Eleanor prepared to discover that some moments are worth waiting 60 years to experience. The opening notes of "You Are My Sunshine" floated through the Grand Ole Opry, played on the same guitar that had first given voice to a scared little girl's dreams. But this time, the melody carried the weight of 6 decades of memory, success, and gratitude. Reba began to sing, her voice strong and clear, but she kept her eyes on Eleanor, encouraging her to join in. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated, feeling the magnitude of the moment. 20,000 people were waiting to hear her sing, people who had paid to see a professional performance, not an elderly teacher's trembling voice. But then she looked at Reba, really looked at her, and saw past the superstar to the 9-year-old girl who had once needed encouragement to find her voice. If Eleanor could be brave for that little girl 60 years ago, she could be brave for the woman she had become. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," Eleanor began, her voice wavering at first but growing stronger with each word. "You make me happy when skies are grey." The audience fell completely silent, not with boredom or disappointment, but with reverence. There was something magical happening on that stage, something that transcended professional performance and touched the realm of pure human connection. As their voices blended together, Eleanor felt a transformation taking place. She wasn't just singing with Reba McEntire, the country music superstar. She was singing with Reba, her student, her spiritual daughter, the child whose potential she had recognized and nurtured all those years ago. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you," they sang together, and Eleanor realized that these words had taken on meanings neither of them could have imagined in that long-ago classroom. "Please don't take my sunshine away." When the song ended, the silence stretched for what felt like eternity, before exploding into the most thunderous applause Eleanor had ever heard. But she barely noticed the crowd's reaction, because she was focused on Reba, who had tears streaming down her face, and was looking at her with an expression of pure love and gratitude. "Thank you," Reba whispered. Her words meant only for Eleanor. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Eleanor reached out and cupped Reba's face gently, the same way she had comforted countless students over the years. "Sweetheart, you had everything you needed inside you already. I just helped you find the key to let it out." As the applause finally began to die down, Reba addressed the audience one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is the power of one person believing in another. Mrs. Thompson didn't just teach me music or encourage my dreams. She taught me that when someone believes in you, you have a responsibility to believe in others." Eleanor felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of completion she hadn't known she was seeking. For 60 years, she had wondered if her small acts of kindness had truly mattered. Tonight, She had learned that they had been the foundation for everything that followed. But Reba wasn't finished with her surprises. As they stood together on the stage, she made an announcement that would change Eleanor's remaining months forever. "Mrs. Thompson, you've spent your whole life giving to others. You've taught thousands of children, helped countless families, and asked for nothing in return. It's time someone gave back to you." Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention, and she certainly didn't want charity, no matter how well-intentioned. "I know you've been battling some health issues," Reba continued gently, "and I know that medical bills can be overwhelming, even for someone who spent their career helping others." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. She hadn't told anyone about her heart condition or her financial struggles, but apparently word had traveled through the small-town network that connected them both to Chocky. "From tonight forward," Reba announced, "all of your medical expenses will be covered. Every doctor's appointment, every medication, every treatment you need will be taken care of. You gave me the gift of believing in my future, and I want to give you the gift of not having to worry about yours." The audience erupted again, but Eleanor felt overwhelmed. "Reba, I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not nearly enough," Reba said firmly, "and there's more. I've been thinking about starting a foundation for years, something that would support music education in rural schools. I'd like to call it the Eleanor Thompson Foundation for Musical Dreams, and I'd like you to help me run it." Eleanor's legs nearly gave out beneath her. A foundation in her name? The magnitude of the honor was almost incomprehensible. "We'll provide instruments for schools that can't afford them, scholarships for talented kids whose families are struggling financially, and support for teachers who go above and beyond for their students. Everything you did for me, we'll do for thousands of other children." As Eleanor stood there processing the incredible generosity being offered to her, she realized that this moment was about more than just her reunion with a former student. It was about the completion of a circle that had begun 60 years ago in a small-town classroom. She thought about all the students she had taught over the years, all the small acts of kindness she had performed without expecting recognition. She thought about Tommy Martinez, who had gone on to become a bilingual teacher himself. She thought about Sarah Williams, who had overcome her stutter to become a speech therapist. She thought about countless others, whose names she remembered, and whose futures she had helped shape in small but significant ways. "Reba," Eleanor said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I accept your generous offer, but not for myself. I accept it for all the children who need someone to believe in them the way I believed in you." The standing ovation that followed seemed to last forever, but Eleanor barely heard it. She was thinking about the future, about the children who would benefit from Reba's success and generosity, about the teachers who would be empowered to make a difference in ways they might never fully understand. As they finally left the stage together, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Her health might be failing, but her legacy would live on through the foundation and through every child whose musical dreams would be nurtured and supported. In the weeks that followed, the video of their duet went viral, reaching millions of people around the world. Comments poured in from former students, thanking teachers who had made a difference in their lives. People began reaching out to reconnect with educators who had shaped their paths. The power of Eleanor and Reba's story had sparked a global movement of gratitude and recognition. Eleanor moved to Nashville to work with Reba on establishing the foundation, living in a comfortable apartment near the music district, where she could watch young artists pursuing their dreams every day. Her health improved dramatically once the stress of financial worry was removed, and she found new purpose in reviewing scholarship applications and visiting schools. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation for Musical Dreams provided its first scholarships just 6 months after that magical night at the Grand Ole Opry. 50 young people received instruments, lessons, and encouragement to pursue their musical aspirations. Eleanor personally met with each recipient, looking for that spark of potential that might need just a little nurturing to grow into something extraordinary. On the first anniversary of their reunion, Reba and Eleanor returned to Chocky, Oklahoma, to visit Eleanor's old classroom. Room 12 had been converted into a computer lab, but the school arranged for them to set it up exactly as it had been in 1964, complete with old wooden desks and a dusty blackboard. As they sat in that familiar space, surrounded by memories and possibilities, Eleanor realized that her journey had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. She had spent her career planting seeds of encouragement in young hearts. never knowing which ones would grow into something magnificent. "Do you ever wonder," Reba asked as they prepared to leave the classroom, "what would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to hand me that guitar that day?" Eleanor smiled, looking around at the room where so many dreams had been born. "I think you would have found your voice eventually. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever." "Maybe," Reba agreed, "but it might have taken longer. It might have been harder, and it definitely wouldn't have been as joyful." As they walked out of room 12 together, Eleanor felt the profound satisfaction that comes from a life well lived and a purpose fulfilled. She had learned that the most important lessons aren't always the ones written on blackboards or found in textbooks. Sometimes they're found in the simple act of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation continues to thrive today, having awarded over 10,000 scholarships and donated instruments to more than 500 schools. Eleanor lived to see her 95th birthday, spending her final years surrounded by the music and laughter of young people whose dreams she had helped nurture. At her memorial service held at the Grand Ole Opry, Reba sang "You Are My Sunshine" one last time, accompanied by a choir of scholarship recipients whose voices filled the hall with the kind of joy that Eleanor had spent her lifetime creating. It was a fitting tribute to a woman who understood that the greatest gift we can give another person is the courage to become who they're meant to be. The story of Eleanor Thompson and Reba McEntire reminds us that we never know which of our small acts of kindness might change someone's entire life. It challenges us to look for the potential in others, especially those who might not see it in themselves. Most importantly, it shows us that love, generosity, and belief in human potential create ripples that extend far beyond anything we can imagine. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, their story offers hope that we all have the power to make a difference, one person at a time, one moment of encouragement at a time, one act of faith in someone else's potential at a time. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, we get to see exactly how far those ripples travel.